Hi, I'm Brian Hagman, and joining me today is Andrew Halonen with Mayfield. Hi, I'm Brian Hagman, and joining me today is Andrew Halonen with Mayfield. Mayfield. Why can't I say Mayflower? Screw the intro. Jeez. Hi, I'm Brian Hagman, and joining me today is Andrew Halonen with Mayflower Consulting. Welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate being here.
I guess to start off with, as usual, like to kind of kick things off, can you maybe just share just a little, like an overview of kind of who you are, what you do, that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a mechanical engineer from Michigan Tech, and I worked at 3M company. I interned at Ford, and then I got a chance to work at 3M full time, both in St. Paul, Minnesota, and in the automotive business in Detroit. 2003, joined a startup engineering firm called GS Engineering up in Houghton, which is where I live today. I worked that for 6 years, got into a lot of advanced material projects, including brakes, MMC brakes. But 2009, I decided that I really like to be a technology matchmaker, so I started Mayflower Consulting.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, so talking about you're consulting for what was the motivation, I guess, behind that to start that? And then I guess like today, like what services do you provide to your clients?
So the motivation was really the fact that at 3M and automotive, I discovered that I like to understand the technical details, but I really like to understand the market, who wants it, why do they want it, what's the competition, what would it take to make a customer change. So that was really my motivation. Today, I represent an aluminum foundry called Eck Industries out of Manitowoc, which is more of a military, premium car type space, a lot of electric trucks and so on. I represent CBMM out of Brazil, which is introducing niobium to the brake market. I also do some market research in aluminum extrusions. I represent a company called Matrium, which is an AI tool for alloy design and process design. And also, last thing is I do a self-funded market research study on brake calipers and suspensions.
So I wanted to talk to you today primarily just kind of focus on the market study you did, the suspension brake caliper study. What's the story behind that? Like, what was your motivation? How'd you get into this to doing this study?
Well, going back to the engineering firm, I worked on metal matrix composites for 10 years. So what is that? It's you take the gray iron brake, completely change it, go to aluminum matrix with silicon carbide inside of it. So I don't have a brake drum in front of me, but I do have a disc, and you can tell by the way I flip it around, it's extremely light. So I was at a trade show showing this disc, and somebody made the comment that if I was going to do lightweighting in the wheel end, I would focus on the caliper. And then another guy says, "Oh, they're already aluminum." And I wondered if he knew what he was talking about. So it's very simple to just go off to the dealership with a magnet and go click it on all the calipers and see what you get. And at that time, it was almost completely iron. I mean, it was 8 out of 10 were iron. So at this very same time of doing that little evaluation, I was representing a major aluminum firm who had a new alloy for knuckles. And so I decided to hire an intern from Michigan Tech, and we went out to dealerships all over the Midwest, really, because you have to get all the brands, and started looking at calipers, knuckles, control arms, and we learned a whole lot.
Oh, wow. Now I know you got tons of parts back there. Is there any you want to show us? Any you want to show me right now?
Yeah, I got all kinds of stuff. So some of the things that really, certainly there's calipers, right? So this is iron caliper on a Chevy Blazer. Then I compared this to a aluminum caliper on a Ford Explorer. A lot of knuckles. So this was 356 aluminum knuckle. Um, and then this one's quite a bit bigger, but it's a ductile iron knuckle.
Gosh.
And then the other thing was control arms. So one of the biggest things I learned is there's a lot of welded steel. So the number one produced vehicle in America is a Ford F-150. Here you got a welded steel upper control arm. The GMC Sierra, single piece, forged aluminum. And then an innovation that we found both on Tesla and Dodge was this stamped steel with a glass-filled nylon polymer injection molded within. So here I showed you three upper control arms with extremely very different strategies on solving the same problem.
Yeah. So how do you get your hands on these? Like, how do you acquire these parts? I never asked you that. Like, what do you like? You literally just walking in and buying them off the shelf somewhere, or where do you get these
Yeah,
things?
these are all dealerships. So I wanted to make sure they're authentic parts from the vehicle as opposed to something that might be sold in the aftermarket.
Yeah, yeah. So when you have all these parts sitting in your office there, like as you're acquiring them, like, you just mentioned a few minutes some things that kind of stood out, but is there anything else that kind of stands out whenever you're doing this, whenever you're acquiring these parts?
Well, like I said, I think I have a bias, and my bias is foundry, right? I work in aluminum castings, now I'm working in iron. So I was extremely surprised to see all the welded steel. So here's another one. This is on a Chevy Blazer.
Mm.
And it looks fairly simple, other than there's two tools. This is a stamping on one side, stamping on the other. Then you have to fixture the parts, weld them. Anytime you weld, you probably have to straighten. So even though it's extremely popular, this is the number one way to make control arms today. Um, there's quite a bit to it. So definitely when you get a chance, especially as an engineer, to get your hands on a part, um, you make a lot of observations that you wouldn't make otherwise. Another observation is if I look at this ductile iron knuckle, it's very thin because iron is stiff. It's stiff, and I know the alloy here, it's very strong. So the packaging of a ductile iron knuckle is much easier than a thicker, lighter weight alloy.
So with your study, it's available now. People can go ahead and purchase this study, get their hands on the info. But who's it for? Like, who's the target person, and I guess what information are they looking to gather with the information?
So when I first did this study, it was back in about 2017. I crawled under cars. I got a bunch of information, and again, my bias was casting, so I was shocked to see all the welded steel and all that. So I put the study for sale, and the tier ones bought it, and they have access to all the benchmarking, firms and so on. And they said, "Whoa, I've never seen something like this. I've never seen somebody compile this information, put a bunch of, put it in pie charts and all that, and put insight around it." So the ones that bought it said, "Will you do this again?" So it came to 2019. I had more help. Fortunately, Michigan Tech has a lot of great interns. And so we went out, and you have to go to Minneapolis to find Audi, BMW, and all that, Teslas. But nonetheless, I had a lot of help, and we just expanded the study. So it's really the tier ones are most interested. If you're doing cast aluminum, for example, on a caliper, you know where you're winning. So your target are all those ductile iron caliper parts. So what are people using? What are OEMs using? And you're looking at crossovers, SUVs, pickups, and so on. What segment should you target next? Another example
Gotcha.
is if you're pushing light weighting. If you're pushing light weighting, you're probably not going to go after the OEM that's the magnet sticks to everything under the car. So they're not making those decisions today. Do you want to be the first to try to get them? Maybe, maybe not. So that's the big one, and certainly OEMs, they don't really have the bandwidth to benchmark many cars. They might pick 3. So within this study, you have 65 crossovers and SUVs, an immense amount of data, 19 pickups and vans, 8 electric cars. So you have a lot of data, and the more data, the better when it comes to making a decision.
Yeah, what's great about your study too is like kind of what you mentioned earlier. Is you physically went out to like dealerships and like physically saw the vehicles, the cars, looked at the parts, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and it's fun to hear from people that have been in the business for a long time, because I often hear the phrase "I used to do that," but then you also say nobody does that anymore, and so why don't they do that? And I think the greatest resource is time, right? So even if you have access to these benchmark softwares and so on, they're extremely capable. It would take you hundreds of hours to put this together. So it's much easier to say it's already available. Let's get it in our hands of our strategy team, our sales director, and let's learn from it and find out where we should focus our attention.
Yeah. Okay. So so now that you've done this study, you've got all this information, you've got all these parts. What did you learn, or what are some things that surprised you that maybe contradicted what you did, what you thought maybe on the different like wheel end or suspension, maybe the calipers? Is there anything that maybe stood out that
Yeah,
worth mentioning?
there's actually a lot of things that stood out. So one is the competition. These parts are very competitive. What I mean by that is, you know, uh, here's an iron caliper. Tomorrow it might be aluminum. They sort of bounce back and forth as this weight and cost is being traded off. And also the interest in this study, since I started to sell a study, and this is the second time doing it, amazing amount of interest. I mean, people that buy it from Taiwan and Europe and kind of all over the world, literally India. So it's really, those people are interested in a study like this. Why is that? It's because it's global supply. So one thing is it's very competitive. Second is, me as a lightweighting guy. So as I look at all the data, I'm like, there's a lot of opportunity for lightweighting that's not being made today. So be careful kind of with the headlines. Don't get caught up in the headlines. Go get your own data, get real data, and then you'd understand, is that OEM, is that target platform, are they doing lightweighting today or not? So this is one way to look at it, because if you look at all the components from front to rear, we may have as many as 13 on one per car. So depending on if they have all the linkages and so on. So there's a lot of parts really to look at underneath and say, do they value lightweighting underneath the car or not?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing you hear is, I'll call it the category is a myth. So I showed you a forging. So this is on a GMC pickup, right? So the statement is aluminum forgings are only on premium European vehicles. So in my preview, which is available online, you can see that there's a whole bunch of vehicles from Detroit and California and all over the place that use forging. So that's one thing to be careful about. Another thing is you'll hear a comment that all the light duty vehicles use aluminum knuckles. Not true. About 40% in this 94 vehicle study, about 40% are ductile. And then
So why is that then? Do you have the answer of why, or is it just you just have the
there's
information?
different answers. There's the safety knuckles. The safety is the knuckles a safety part, right? So if it breaks, you're going in the ditch or you're going in the wrong lane or whatever. So there's that part of it. And if the OEM can't get the crash data, reliable crash data with alloy A, they're going to go to alloy B. Packaging is a big one. I showed you that ductile iron is very thin, and there's a lot of attachment points on there. It's a very thin, strong material. Cost, so aluminum is going to cost more than iron. There's a variety of decisions, and I think if you're in the car space, you're looking at each car as sort of a personality. Each car has their own targets, and it's difficult to generalize across even a brand for that matter. Calipers, certainly the statement I made already, somebody said calipers are already aluminum. Well, in this vast study, 8 out of 10 are iron. So it's really about, if you're going to make business decisions, get a lot of data before you do that. Another thing is bias. So my bias is foundry. So very interesting to see all the welded steel. And I think steel is continuing to innovate, right? You see steel with polymer inside. You're starting to see steel that's not welded. It's thicker and it's formed. And so you can get enough geometry to get that stiffness and make it one piece. So there's innovation across the board, and I wouldn't count anybody out. Another area that I learned is knuckles. So I'm very familiar with cast aluminum, so I wasn't really surprised with what I saw. So I went out and I purchased these knuckles, right? And there's one you can see maybe behind me. So I went off to Michigan Tech and I said, let's cut these knuckles here. Let's pull mechanical properties, look at some chemistries, tell me what they all are. So I expected to see 45-12. The 12 means 12% elongation. I didn't find that. I found an alloy that I did not expect to see, and also I found a custom alloy. So I was glad I did it, because it's helps me again to say, be careful about assuming that knuckle is that, and I'm going to compete with my alloy and I'm going to beat it, because you might not know what you're competing with. And certainly calipers, this aluminum caliper, and I compared the Explorer to the Blazer, very similar vehicles, similar weight, similar powertrain, and this saves about 6 pounds, almost 3 kg on the front axle. That's a lot of weight if you're chasing light weighting. So I just assumed aluminum calipers is the low-hanging fruit in light weighting. And it wasn't really until I bought the two parts and compared the bridge thicknesses, the sizes, pistons, all kinds of things, that I realized there's way more to the story, and also wheel sizes. So
what about on the EV side? Obviously, OEMs are transitioning. Everyone's transitioning to electric vehicles. Is there anything you can talk to about what you saw on the EV side? Did you? I guess there's anything relevant from the EV side that you saw?
Yeah, we have about 8 EVs, and I'm always tracking what new cars are coming out with and all that. So intuitively, let's step back and think about electric car. You're range limited, right? So that's the big thing, is where do you charge? How far do you get in your charge? So intuitively, if you cut weight, you're going to go further. However, the cars are very fast. They're like little rocket ships, every one of them, right? So just 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, where you used to have to buy extraordinarily expensive IC engine car to do that, and they're also super heavy. So what happens when you get a fast car that's super heavy? If you're designing these types of components, if you think about the weight of that battery pack is largely in the center of gravity of the car, in the center of the car, and then the tire patch on the road is really your friction to the road. The parts I'm talking about are in the middle. That is a lot of loads on those parts. And so, yes, you'd like to make them lighter for range, but you got to manage the loads, you got to manage the life, you got to manage fatigue, you got to manage all that stuff. So I think it's really interesting dynamic happening there. And on top of that, today's electric cars are very expensive, what, $60,000 per car. So if you're going to reach the masses with an electric car, you got to lower that price. Are they going to look close at these parts? I believe they will. So I think they've always had the vehicle dynamics scenario, of course. I think it's just going to be different and probably more difficult than it was before.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to get their hands on this study, this information, what's the best place for them to go? Where do they need to go?
Yeah. So as a lightweighting guy, you won't be surprised. My website is lightweighting.co, and under the lightweighting.co website is the market research page. We put together some little videos on knuckles, on how do you go through this vast giant spreadsheet and look at different programs and what they're using, on calipers, comparing the control arms and so on. So there's a quick videos to help you understand it. You can download the preview for free, and then just let's have a conversation to see if this is something you're looking for.
Yeah, no, good. I'll make sure we include a link to all that information there too. Then I guess if someone has this, they review it, they've got questions, maybe they want to just maybe have a discussion. Are you easily accessible? Can they approach you? Can they contact you to talk about the report, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So after the sale, there's a lot of data. Like I said, I pretty much give the whole thing away, right? The whole spreadsheet, pictures, all the analysis, everything. And I think I organize the data in a good way, but I'm not the customer, so they're going to organize it the way they want to. And then we have a video call, and one of these calls we had 10 people on the phone, and it's really just I put out the information I thought was most relevant, but the questions can come from all over the place, and I'd be happy to have that conversation.
Well, thanks, Andrew. This has been great. I appreciate it, man. I'm glad you were able to join me. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, you're welcome, Brian. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you very much.